And allowing the rapist to work as a janitor at a school. Are we seeing a lot of that kind of advertising?
So those are precisely the type of soft on crime attack ads that we're seeing a lot of, especially recently. So earlier we discussed a little bit how common certain types of attack ads are. And currently about 82% of attack ads focus on criminal justice issues. So this is squarely the type of attack ad we're seeing.
In 2008, Michael Gableman defeated Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice Louis Butler being the court's only black justice. What tactics did Gableman use?
So that is probably one of the most famous cases involving these attack ads because of how many problems it raised. So in that ad, the implication was that Louis Butler played a role in freeing a criminal defendant who later went on to molest another child. In fact, he had no involvement with his release from prison. He wasn't a judge on that case. He was a court-appointed defender, and he was unsuccessful in having his client released. The ad was also raised a lot of controversy because the ad showed Louis Butler, the only black justice's face, up against the face of the criminal defendant who was a convicted child molester, and it was sort of accused of involving a lot of race baiting.
Is there any kind of oversight or regulation of what candidates claim in ads like that? Because I would have thought that you could have sued Gableman, Butler could have sued Gableman for defamation of character.
I think the laws are such that it's very hard to raise those. It's a very, very high bar to raise a claim on defamation. The other way that these ads are sometimes regulated to some extent is that you'll have state bars speak out and say this ad is deceptive. Sometimes candidates will sign pledges saying that we won't put out negative ads, or we will call for negative ads put by outside groups to be taken down. Those are relatively rare. I think that is actually a step that should be taken. We should be seeing more candidates vocally distancing themselves from ads that are distorting in that way and actually calling for them to be taken down.
But Gableman was elected.
He was elected.
And he's never been reprimanded?
No, he's not.
Given the job of judges, is there any way to attack other than criminal justice? Judges aren't deciding tax or school policy.
Well, there are a lot of things that judges do from the bench that are certainly relevant to whether or not they should continue to keep their seat. So their treatment of the parties that come before them, their treatment of attorneys, whether or not they're making decisions based on the law instead of outside influences. The voters have the right to real information about whether the judges are doing their jobs properly, and these ads just aren't getting at that information.
The cost of an average race for the House of Representatives is over $1.5 million these days. For the Senate, it's over $10 million. How common are really expensive judicial elections like the one that Blankenship spent $3 million on?
I mean, they're increasingly common. So we had just in 2013 and 14, we had 8 states that had over $1 million of spending in state Supreme Court races. You know, looking back in the 90s, there were only about 3 states that consistently saw expensive races. Since then, we're seeing dozens of states that are having those sorts of races that are at least topping $1 million.
Social scientists debate what all the money in legislative elections is buying: access to lawmakers, or actual decisions, or maybe only peace of mind for the donor. How often are donors to judicial elections affected at all by a judge's decisions?
Well, it's common. I mean, you have if you look at who the contributors are, they're very frequently repeat players before the court. So attorneys are big contributors to judicial candidates. Business interests, others who are regularly appearing before the court are big players. And it's common as well to have people with cases actually pending before the court spend money on judicial races. We saw that just in Illinois, for example, this past year.
Prosecutors also often run for office, and then they're the ones who then run for judges. So pretty much it's law and order followed by law and order.
I mean, one concern we definitely have is what the pathways to the bench look like. And if we know that we have this trend of proliferation of soft on crime and tough on crime ads, and the implication is that that's just another obstacle that folks from criminal defender backgrounds have to making it to the bench.
And the Supreme Court decided a case last April, Williams-Yulee versus Florida Bar. What was that case about?
So that case addressed whether or not states could bar the personal solicitation of campaign contributions by judges. So what most states that have judicial elections do is they allow judges to fundraise through campaign committees, but not to directly ask contributors for money. And so there was a First Amendment challenge to that, very modest, I think, regulation on judicial speech, saying that, as a First Amendment matter, those judges should have been able to personally ask for money. And the Supreme Court upheld the restriction, basically citing, kind of the importance of the integrity of the courts, and that, having a judge directly ask for money did raise concerns about, kind of things being both overly coercive, and that it did raise real concerns in terms of the public being confident that courts were going to be deciding cases based on the law and not based on who was giving them money.
It leads to odd kinds of bedfellows. Floyd Abrams, who is an activist for the First Amendment, made the point that if judges ought to be elected, they must be allowed to campaign for election.
Well, they certainly are being allowed to campaign for their elections. So one of the points that we really tried to stress in our amicus brief in this case is what a modest restriction this is. So judges are still allowed to speak openly about their qualifications for the bench. They're still able to fundraise. The only restriction is that they can't be the one to do the direct ask. So they themselves can't say to lawyers that come before them regularly, "May I please have some money?"
So they're not allowed to do that anymore in every state?
So not all states have a restriction on judges asking personally, but the states that do have that restriction, it was upheld.
How did the court split on Yulee?